morning. I'm really pleased to be participating in this program today because for my 3+ decades at the Landmark Society, often you genealogy buffs or genealogy professionals are among the fewest of the professions we see at our magnificent Wenrick Library, which is a reference library over at our headquarters in the Cornhill neighborhood. And we've been collecting material on literally thousands of buildings, structures, object sites, anything from an outhouse to a barn, to a farmhouse, to a worker's cottage, to a commercial store, to, of course, probably our biggest inventory, historic houses in the Rochester, Monroe County region. And for you today, some new technology and some new information. A historic house is not a landmark building that I'm speaking of. That is government designation. In our profession, the National Park Service tells us a historic building, does that make people uncomfortable, particularly if their building, their birthday happens to be older than 50 years. Most people are very comfortable looking at buildings that were constructed before their birth dates, and most people guess that 100 years old is what a historic building is. Historic simply means a building of any type that is 50 or more years old. So ladies and gentlemen, we are looking at 1959 built buildings and earlier, and I can see the smirks or giggles or looks of astonishment. That is not easy when we are thinking of something in our own lifetime. Historic usually means long ago, far away, and in the misty past of whatever century we're dealing with. Now, what I'm going to do this morning is give you a really crash course in reading architecture. Just like you can read a book, you open it up and you were drilled on your ABCs and when you were children, and then you learned how to spell words and put words into sentences, sentences into paragraphs, one would hope. The same thing we do with buildings. I research my own family. I would never pretend to say I'm a genealogist, because I've been researching those whose family members I have photographs of, and I'll say basically the Civil War and forward, because we've had a lot of mysteries, a lot of questions, but I don't have family members that left me 800 letters, 16 diaries, so I've had to do something every day, and looking at the built environment, in this case the city of Rochester, as well as out in Wayne County in the town of Ontario, and in Livingston County, the village of Caledonia and the hamlet of Mumford. Looking at the physical environment in which my ancestors lived in, much of which still survives. You can turn off the lights if you want, I'm not using any notes. And I'm trying to use the physical environment because I really don't give a toot if I get a list of 800 names with birth dates and death dates. I mean, that's sort of like a competition. The person who has the most wins. I'm interested in the people who were my ancestors. What were they like? What kind of personality did they have? What kind of everyday existence did they have? What did they struggle with? What was their environment, which was, in some cases I can walk down the street where they lived, shopped, went to school, what was it like in the 1880s if I was in this neighborhood? What was I doing every day? What was I coping with? What was my physical world? What did I consider happened to World War II? Most soldiers that were drafted in World War II had never left their own counties. So suddenly going to the Pacific Theater or Europe was a real stretch. Those of us today could jump in our car across the street and get down to the lake in Charlotte in probably about 20 minutes if you make all the lights. Our ancestors, as recent as, say, World War I, that was a big deal to go to Charlotte. We think of having a cottage maybe in the Finger Lakes or the cottage up in the Adirondacks. Well, if you had a cottage or a tent down at White City and got there once a year, that was a long trip. That was a distance from your house. So the mindset we have in the 21st century is another challenge in dealing with researching our ancestors. What did they consider exotic? What did they consider far away versus something that was close to home? The Landmark Society, in terms of those of you looking at houses and information about houses, there's something we give you every week in the city newspaper. It's called the homework column. City newspaper, the homework column, where we have written up now over on nearly 600 houses in the last 10 years, giving you a little bit of background about the house, what it looked like when it was built, the type of neighborhood it was in, Some of these houses may be pertinent to you during doing family research in a neighborhood like Maplewood or out in Browncroft or whatever. Here's some additional information you may not know of. In addition to that, I've given you the handy-dandy crib sheet because I can't give you 2 semesters of teaching in 30 minutes. On the front is a wonderful list of websites, many of which you might know, some of which you might not know. In particular, the 22,000 photos on the Rochester Images website. This is an amazing resource because it's going to give you views of Rochester and a number of the towns and villages that predate World War II. It may give you entrees to neighborhoods that you are looking to find information about. Where did Grandma shop? Where was that butcher store? What was the bakery shop? So the Rochester Images website with these, particularly the Albert Stone collection, is very useful. Another website is at the bottom. How many of you know about the FultonHistory.com website? Well, those of you that are just finding out about it, you can tell your families you'll see you in about 10 years. There's a historian up in Fulton, New York, who has a mania and passion for history, but we're so glad he's really interested in newspapers. Most of you know that the Rochester newspapers about after 1900 cannot be scanned. There's no index. He's done it for us. He has scanned over 10 million pages of upstate newspapers. Rochester, Buffalo, Syracuse, Utica, Rome, Schenectady, Albany, and smaller communities like Watertown, Fairport, Nunde, and Greece. He has scanned these newspapers and they are searchable on this website. I have found information about my own family members that would have been absolutely impossible to find, much less I wouldn't have known existed, because a lot of the smaller town newspapers will put in little items of interest like, Mrs. Judson Howk just came back to Ontario after visiting her sister in Caledonia for a weekend. These little social tidbits, and they'll have from communities such as Walworth and all the outlying. This is a Fairport newspaper, but they're calling this is hot gossip before people had telephones. So I cannot tell you the stupendous service this individual has provided us. And if any of you are working with local historical societies and you have scanned your newspapers, call this individual. He will come and add your newspapers to his website and make them scannable. Because I told 2 colleagues, one in Nunde, New York, then she contacted him. Now the Nunde newspapers are searchable. So the FultonHistory.com, how many of you have used that website? You know how dangerous it is, don't you? I'm actually searching for a lot of information about James Gould Cutler, twice Rochester mayor, the best architect of his generation, and somebody who invented one item that made him filthy rich, the Cutler mail chute. And I Googled James G. Cutler and I got 1,000 citations that I have to look at on this website. Be very judicious though on what words you put in to scan, and you don't have to be a good speller. They let you scan phonetically as well as accurately. So now we're going to dance into the built environment and the world that surrounds us every day and ask the 1950s, the 1910s, the 1880s, or the 1840s.